Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna. Congresswoman, thanks so much for coming back on.
Thanks for having me back on.
Earlier this month, you participated in the House Oversight Committee's hearing with sanctuary city mayors. You listened to their testimony, you asked them questions, and at the end of your questioning, you told them that you're criminally referring them to the Department of Justice. So that's a big step. Can you talk to us about your decision?
Absolutely. I think I share the same frustrations that the American people do, in that, first of all, Congress has the ability to do criminal referrals, but also now that we have the Department of Justice, it's time that the Department of Justice actually looks into bringing charges against people that are knowingly breaking federal law. So the reason why I went down the line of questioning that I did, and I would encourage everyone watching this clip to look at that line of questioning, if you guys can also maybe consider adding it into this interview. I wanted to see what their responses were for their own policies reflecting in their city versus what federal law says. And as you saw, based on their responses, I wasn't initially going to refer them if they said that they had made changes that are aligned with federal law and that they were no longer breaking the law. As you saw, though, with their responses, they all admitted to breaking the law. And so, in my opinion, they're long-term causing us to spend more money having to deal with the issue of illegal immigration, but also they're putting Americans at risk for personal safety. And so what I did was I made the referral. I actually just today followed up with the Department of Justice. They acknowledged receipt of our inquiry, checking on the status of their investigations into these mayors. And frankly, I look forward to the Department of Justice holding them accountable. Because look, if you did it, if I did it, we'd be in jail. But just because they're in blue cities doesn't mean that they're protected.
I want to talk about New York City Mayor Eric Adams particularly because he seemingly has taken a tougher stance on immigration. I want to read part of his testimony. He said this, quote, "To be clear, a sanctuary city classification does not mean our city will ever be a safe haven for violent criminals. It also does not give New York City the authority to violate federal immigration laws. To the contrary, New York City will always comply with city, state, and federal laws as it does now." Eric Adams has said before, "Hey, I'm cooperating with ICE. Hey, I'm cooperative with Borders Czar Tom Homan." In fact,
Mhm.
they sat at that Fox and Friends interview saying how they're working together. What do you think of him? Do you think he's in a different category here? What more do you want to see from New York City's mayor?
Well, look, as I stated earlier, I gave the mayors and I read their opening statements. And again, the ones that were in question with me, I asked them point blank on whether or not they're still violating federal law in my line of questioning. And as you saw with those referrals, if they were in line with federal law, I did not refer them to the DOJ. So I think obviously New York City has been plagued. Look, we know that New York City is a very blue area, and we know that its own representatives, for the most part, are doing everything they can to undermine with this administration and what Congress has mandated that they do in regards to stopping illegal immigration and enabling some of these people that are coming here doing very bad things. Look, I would like to see, though, all of these cities adopt a no illegal immigration policy. As we're seeing, Mayor Adams has actually gone back on his previous stances and is now doing the right thing. And so I hope that he continues to do that. But, I find it very interesting that as soon as he came out against the Biden policies on illegal immigration, that then there was a case opened up against him in regards to corruption charges. So look, obviously we don't want people doing illegal stuff, but I find the timing very, very coincidental.
Your news made headlines that you were criminally referring these mayors to the DOJ.
Mhm.
Did you tip your Republican colleagues off? Did you let them know? Did you tip off the Democrats? Was everyone shocked? I mean, what are those conversations with your colleagues looking like?
Well, look, again, as I stated earlier, I wanted to see what the mayor's responses were first before I made the referrals. So I came with the referrals ready, but it didn't necessarily mean that I was going to end up referring them. Again, I went through that line of questioning, got them on record with their own policies versus that of federal law. And so I hope that the DOJ considers all of that with evidence when they take up the case. If they do, we're waiting on a response from them currently.
I want to read something from the American Immigration Council. They said that under the 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, the federal government, quote, may neither issue directives requiring the states to address particular problems nor command the state's officers or those of their political subdivisions to administer or enforce a federal regulatory program. So essentially, do you think that the investigation can go anywhere because of the 10th Amendment? What do you make of that?
Most certainly, I think that they're perverting the 10th Amendment in that response. I would ask them, do they have the same perspective on child pedophiles?
Well, I mean, that just stopped me in my tracks. So what do you think their response would be to that?
I think that they're going to try to hem this up in court, and I think that they're going to try to say that the federal government is overreaching in an effort to protect the American people. But these are also the same cities, mind you, that are asking for federal dollars to deal with the problems that they themselves have caused. So if they want federal money, you need to comply. If you don't want federal money, fine, but figure out a way to pay for it. And then also, too, I think cities' policies stop when American citizens start having their own constitutional freedoms violated. When you are no longer able to access life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness because you have someone extorting you, someone robbing you, someone basically enabling a criminal activity, as we saw with the gangs in Colorado. I mean, that's obviously a violation of any American-born citizen. And I would argue that that entire argument in itself that they're bringing forward is pretty hypocritical.
What do you want to come out of this investigation? I mean, at the end of the day, it seems like this DOJ, this AG is different than the Biden administration's. They're releasing, it seems like you're happy with this, the JFK files. They released some records with related to Jeffrey Epstein. What would you want to see from AG Pam Bondi regarding your criminal referral?
Well, look, to be clear, it was President Trump that released the JFK files, MLK files, and RFK files. We have the documents that are currently being uploaded at NARA, the National Archives, for JFK, but we're still waiting on MLK and RFK, of which we will also obtain. But look, we've been asking publicly for Pam Bondi, the AG, to release the Epstein files. She needs to do that. That was a mandate that the American people have asked for. If you look at any commentary online, the American people are still wanting to know what the status is. We obviously understand protecting victim privacy. However, why is it that there have been no charges brought against those that conspired with Jeffrey Epstein to traffic people? I mean, that's pretty egregious. Whether you have money, power, fame, whatever it is, they should not be above the law. And so I would urge the Attorney General to consider doing that. Also, Congress is still waiting on those files. And so, as you know, I don't hold declassification authority. But moving forward, I think that the American people want there to be justice served. And that means having a very aggressive Attorney General. I applaud her efforts in what she's doing with Tesla. Obviously, it's not right that American citizens are having their property destroyed or that there's literally acts of domestic terrorism because of what Elon Musk is doing with Doge. But I would also say that Jeffrey Epstein, pretty bad guy, and there's people walking free. I would say that, these mayors having to be criminally referred to the Department of Justice so that they can open up a case against them. Look at the impacts that they have had, not just on American citizens across the country, but on their own citizens in their cities. And so I would say as aggressive as possible. We have only a short window until the midterms. We're hoping to keep the House. But again, my job is not to rely on what may come of things. It's to be active and active now. And so I continue to encourage as aggressive as possible behavior out of the DOJ.
I would, if I could, want to get some of your takes on news of the day. First, proxy voting for new parents. You and I talked about this in January of 2024. You've been a long proponent of proxy voting for new parents. There's a bipartisan push here to allow this, including with your Democratic colleague, Congresswoman Brittany Patterson. Speaker Mike Johnson today called proxy voting unconstitutional. He asked where the limiting principle was, essentially saying this could lead to a slippery slope, and he said that it violates centuries of tradition. What do you think of his response?
Speaker Mike Johnson voted by proxy multiple times in the 117th Congress. He then brought forward a case to the Supreme Court, which the Supreme Court would not hear. Basically, to my knowledge, inquiring on whether or not if people voted by proxy that their votes and or the legislation passed by proxy would have been considered not law, as it, in his terms, would not have been constitutional, and that was turned down by the Supreme Court. So, look, I understand his concerns if it was written in the previous form. However, we've made the changes to ensure that it is in line with the Constitution by removing the quorum clause. It can be done, it will be done, and as you are seeing right here, these are all the times he voted by proxy. So I guess the question is now what? We are going to be bringing up the vote to the floor. There is massive bipartisan support, not just with the Democrats, but Republicans. We're collecting more signatures, and they actually had to cut off the petition at 218 because that's the max number that's allowed for the petition. So we're hoping that, again, they don't work against the entire conference. But remember, it's going to pass whether it's now or next Congress. The fact is that Democrats had vote by proxy without guardrails. We have guardrails in place specifically for new members. And then I would also argue that that argument in itself is pretty ridiculous, given that, again, he voted by proxy.
Yeah, you did post those on X. And something, I mean, that can be said about this, even back in January of 2024, the people that are supporting this are politicians from all different sides of the political spectrum here. So I'm curious, you're saying that this is going to the floor, this is going to pass. When you posted those, did you get any response from him?
No, not directly, but again, I am well and more than inclined to talk with members on the floor. And so I would encourage people, I've been making my case publicly because they're the ones that are going to the press and they're the one telling reporters things instead of coming to me directly. So I'm responding publicly. But again, I've never swayed in this position. I went through the legality factors of this. I checked it. It's in line with the Constitution. The real question is, why would they not want members specifically who've given birth to vote? And really what's interesting is when I initially presented this, it was just for female members, just for new moms in Congress. And remember, we're talking about 0.00012% or 0.0012%. I was number 12. Brittany Pedersen is number 13. What's interesting is we're now at the slimmest majority in U.S. history. And we have now 2 members of Congress that are men whose wives are due to give birth. If not, they already haven't given birth. So effectively, you're then telling them that they can't spend time with their newborn or be there. What happens if there's a medical emergency, as in the case with Wesley Hunt, who had his son in the NICU? So look, Wesley Hunt's a big supporter of this. There's other members who I'm not going to name because we're starting to see the pressure campaign come forward from the conference. But, I'm not going to engage in this ridiculous debate that it's not constitutional when we've made it clearly in line with the Constitution, when you have over 50% of the Republican conference who's voted by proxy is in favor of it, specifically for this case. To say that it would open up the floodgates for other cases, I would argue, what legislation has the Congress done currently in the Republican side to actually codify what President Trump is doing? We are certainly able to pass bills that really are just messaging bills, but we're not actually codifying President Trump's plan and agenda. This might actually enable that to happen. We'll see.
Yeah, his point about the slippery slope argument, when you and I talked last year, it was, I believe, 6 weeks you were allowing new moms of Congress. Now I think it's 12 weeks. Correct me if
Yep.
I'm wrong, but
Correct.
there's no slippery slope, right? Considering it's just for new moms and dads who's
Well, Johnson didn't want to support it with just new moms, just for female members. And so I came up with a negotiation with the Democrats, and we were able to get them to sign on to support it. So to be clear, Johnson did not allow for it to be just new moms. And going back and forth in negotiations with them, they try to say that doing discharge petition, which is a parliamentary measure to actually physically collect signatures on the floor. It's an old school way of doing it, that it's a tool of the minority. And I laughed because I've read the rule book twice. I'm probably one of the few members that has done that. To say to members of Congress that this is a tool of the minority and shouldn't be used. Well, they said the same thing about inherent contempt with Merrick Garland. And it was Republican members that protected Merrick Garland. So I would say that that whole idea negotiation is really a tactic that's used for when they want people to just come up here and vote in line with the party. But that's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to vote, bring forward legislation, and actually do my job. And that means, guess what? Using discharge petitions. It means collecting signatures. It means doing inherent contempt. It means if people violate our constitutional and check and balance as an equal branch of government, that we follow up on that, to include whether it's asking the DOJ for their response on Jeffrey Epstein, we're asking the DOJ for their response on what's happening with the sanctuary city mayors. That's my job. And so I'm doing my job. I'm not going to back off from this.
And I just want your comment, if you could, on one final story. News broke yesterday that The Atlantic's editor-in-chief was inadvertently involved or added to a group chat with top U.S. national security leaders about the U.S. airstrikes in Yemen against the Houthis. What's your reaction to that really explosive story?
Well, look, I find it interesting that this is from the same journalist that pushed a lot of fabricated stories about this administration. Also, too, interesting that they never point out that there is never any classified information shared on that Signal chat platform. And so I find the spin on this very interesting. But look, The Atlantic and how they've really represented themselves with this administration has not been 100% honest. Also, too, if you're really thinking about it from a national security perspective and they were so concerned about it, why are they posting now group chats on the internet? All of that should be called the question. But look, there is nothing classified sharing those conversations. Obviously, we saw very candid responses from the vice president and people involved. And frankly, I think the American people appreciated their honesty and feel the same way for many of their positions. So I back the president in this. I back what his decision is with now Security Advisor Waltz, who I know personally and has done great things as a veteran for this country. And we'll continue calling at the hypocrisy where we see it.
And they said that the airstrikes were successful, but Goldberg did write this. What I will say, in order to illustrate the shocking recklessness of this signal conversation, is that the Hegseth post contained operational details of forthcoming strikes on Yemen, including information about targets, weapons the U.S. would be deploying, and attack sequencing. If the White House, if you're saying, hey, this stuff wasn't classified, is that pushing him? Do you think he should then post the entire conversation? Do you think that would compromise national security at all?
Well, I find it interesting, right, that they're arguing that this stuff shouldn't be posted in a signal chat, and then the Atlantic takes it and actually puts a huge story on it, which means they and themselves were skewing the information from the get-go. But yeah, the White House said that it was not classified information. I would argue that if you asked Pete Hegseth this information in person, he might tell you exactly what he thinks on these topics. And so I look at things from a lens of, did it hurt the American people? Was the strike successful? Was it classified information? But then also to, what's the spin on this? And again, you can see this from the get-go. Instead of leaving that group chat, this individual decided to stay in the group chat. They then collected information. They then decided to write a story on it, trying to imply that there was classified information where there wasn't, and then said that it was so bad that there was a group chat, but then they took this and presented it to the world stage. So I just think the whole thing's hypocritical.
And my final question, do you think Signal should be used at all then for any type of national security conversations?
Well, I think that there definitely needs to be encrypted messaging platforms. I would argue that we should probably work on designing one that's hardened, at least for members in Congress and then also the White House specifically, because we tend to be targets. As you know, in Eric Swalwell's case, he slept with a Chinese spy, but he didn't know, I guess, apparently at the time that she was a spy. And so, we're constantly being monitored and surveillance. And there are people that will try to collect data from members of Congress. So yeah, we need something. I actually will tell you that I don't have any issues with Signal personally. So it's definitely a topic of discussion right now, for sure.
Well, Congresswoman, per usual, I always appreciate our conversations. I always appreciate your candor. Thank you so much
Thank
for joining
you.
me. You're welcome back anytime.
Perfect.